Today I'm going to be answering a viewer question, and what they want to know is how to go about laying out a pattern for a miniature hinge that can be used on a small cabinet or a dollhouse or something of that nature. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on a miniature hinge. I'm going to be discussing how to figure out the pattern, the dimensions of the hinge barrel, and how to forge that hinge barrel around whatever pin you want to use for this hinge. It's an interesting project. It's not very complicated, but because you're working on such a small scale, it does get tedious. So if you're interested in forging small hinges or just the challenge of it all, yeah, hope you enjoy this video. So this is the hinge that I'm going to be laying out for you today. It's not very ornate, and that's fine. That's not the point of this video. What I want to demonstrate today is how simple it is to lay this out and get it done without any trial and error at all. The first step is to measure the pin stock that you're going to be using. Here I'm using a small common nail, and nails rarely conform to a fractional measurement, so I'm going to be using a dial indicator, and it's measuring in thousandths of an inch. I'm sorry, I have no idea what the metric equivalent of that is, and it really doesn't matter. The important thing is to get an accurate measurement of the pin stock. The next step is to measure the thickness of the material that you're going to be using for the hinge. Here I'm using a very thin piece of sheet metal. It's usually considered body metal. You can cut it very easily with a pair of tin snips. Once you have those two dimensions, you can add them together and multiply them by pi, which is 3.14, and that gives you the actual length of the material that you're going to need to wrap around your pin. Now, if you set your dial indicator to that total length, you can go directly to the stock and scribe that length right on the workpiece that you're going to be using. To shape the barrel of the hinge, you're going to need some kind of a forming stake. It doesn't have to be very complicated. Here I just have a railroad spike that's standing up in my vise, and I've taken it to the grinder to remove any rough edges from the tip. A better option is to use a hatchet stake. Again, it doesn't have to be fancy. I just made this one by grinding a single bevel on a piece of scrap iron that I had laying around. What I'm holding here is 1/2 of the hinge that I'm going to be putting together today. It's a very basic form of hinge. The two pieces are identical, and it's just two single hinge barrels that slide up against each other on a pin. The part that I'm holding in the needle nose pliers is actually the hinge plate that gets mounted to the cabinet, and the smaller section is going to be the hinge barrel. And this hopefully illustrates how important it is to actually do the math and figure this stuff out. If I had to guesstimate how long I needed for that section, there's no way that I would have come up with that length. I would have fallen way short, and I would have had to start over and, again, estimate how much I fell short and probably do the process 2 or 3 times before I got it right. And in case you're wondering, this is how the two blanks are going to fit together as a hinge. When you're forging a hinge barrel, or for that matter, any kind of a tube that is going to get wrapped around a mandrel, you always start by forging the edges first and working your way to the center. Now, a hinge barrel only has one edge, so you start from the outside edge and you start rolling that curve back towards the hinge plate. So I'm starting here by concentrating on making sure that I get the curve at the tip as close as possible to the final dimensions. Now, this is a really small hinge, so it's going to be impossible to get the curve exactly right, but the important thing is to make sure that the curve starts at the tip and works its way back to the other side of the barrel. Once that curve is established, I can keep curving it by hammering it on a flat surface. But if I create the curve too far back and I leave a flat section at the tip, that's going to be very hard to remove later on once I start wrapping the barrel around the hinge pin, because I'm not going to have any way to get in there to hammer that straight section around the hinge pin. So it's really important that that section be curved before I lose access to it. Now that I have the hinge barrel roughly forged into a tube, I can insert the pin and use the pin to support the work while I finish shaping the hinge barrel. This hinge is designed to be a surface mounted hinge, so I need to have the barrel of the hinge offset from the hinge plate. So I'm going to start by pushing it out of line by hammering the plate back down to the anvil face, and then I'll work between the anvil face and the edge of the anvil to refine that offset and make sure that everything is truly in line. When you're done shaping the hinge barrel, it's important to make sure that the pin is perfectly in line with the flat part of the hinge. If it's out of line when you're looking at it either from the top or from the side, the two halves of the hinge are going to swing in a different arc. So that's going to create tension on the door, and it's going to either cause the hinge to fail or to work loose from the cabinet. At this point, I'm a little further along. I have both halves of the hinge complete, and I've temporarily fitted them together by just sliding the hinge pin into the hinge barrel. Now I'm going to check the action of the hinge, make sure that it's not binding anywhere, and make any corrections that I need to do to make the hinge run smoothly. When you're happy with the operation of the hinge and you have all the cleanup that you need to do, everything's running smoothly, you can go ahead and cut the hinge pin to length and rivet it in place. All you're trying to do here is create enough of a burr on each side of the hinge pin to make sure that the pin doesn't work loose in one direction or the other. You don't need to bash it here. If you hit it too hard, it's just going to bend the pin on the inside. You'll have to redo the hinge probably, because there isn't really any safe way of getting that pin out of there without wrecking the whole hinge. Don't forget, you're working with sheet metal here that's just a little bit thicker than a soup can. So here's another look at the finished hinge blank. At this point, you can do some open work to the hinge by using a jeweler's saw or do some decorative file work around the outside edges. Basically, it's a blank canvas at this point. The size and shape of the hinge is totally up to you, and the process of assembling it is going to be exactly the same regardless of what you decide to make.